When I was growing up, one of the things we used to hear in church was that we were supposed to avoid worldliness and that we were supposed to come out of the world. We were supposed to get away from the world. We're going to touch on that a little bit more in a coming study, but I want to look at a balance to that in some statements that the Apostle When I was growing up, one of the things that we would hear in church from time to time is that the world was bad. And I think our studies as of late have maybe demonstrated that, yeah, the world is bad and it does tempt us and it does distract us. But we were also then told to withdraw from the world at times and in various ways. And I didn't exactly know how that was supposed to look, but you somehow had this idea that you were supposed to separate from the world. And we had some verses that we took out of context, and we'll come back and deal with some of those matters in a future study. But when we're talking about the world and its things, there is a balance in here. And it's not a balance that we can play with the world. It's a balance that the world is not something that we ought to wrap ourselves up in, but we are going to have to operate in it. And we're going to take a look at that today briefly, but there's going to be a proper perspective as we do that. I'm Pastor Tim Holscher, and we're looking at the Holy Spirit's ministry in our lives, that He gives us love, which we are supposed to use to fulfill Christ's command to love one another. In 1 John 2:15 tells us to not love the world, or if you are doing it, then this imperative would be stop loving the world. Kind of depends on where you are with the matter. Stop loving the things that are in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love for the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust for the flesh, the lust for the eyes, and the boastful pride of life, they're not from the Father, but they're from the world. The world is passing away, and also its lusts. I bet every one of you can remember things that were so popular just 2 years ago, and everybody had to have it. I remember a couple of years ago around here, I was still working up at the school. Well, it's probably more than a couple of years now, but a little bit. Remember those fidget spinners? And man, at school, all these kids were spinning them, and you kept having to tell the kids to put them away. Now, you know what? I don't see them anywhere. But they were all the rage, and everybody had to have them. It's just an example of the fact that the world is faddish. It's always coming up with a fad, and that fad could be an investment fad. Right now, cryptocurrency, it's been the stock market, gold. There's fads in the world like this. Could be fads about clothing. What are you supposed to wear? How do you dress? I've watched fashions go in a wide range of things in the years that I've walked on this earth. Yeah, I believe that. That kind of surprises me. Yeah, I've watched a lot of different clothing fads come and go. And hairstyles and all kinds of things like this. You get the point. The world is faddish. So he says the world is passing away and its lusts. But the one who does the will of God abides forever. And the will of God is to love one another. So while the fads come and go, and you are going to drive yourself nuts trying to keep up with the latest fad in the world, if you just focus on loving other believers, you're going to be able to be at ease. But having said that, we have a statement in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 that I think may shed a little bit of light on this and help us balance exactly what John means. In 1 Corinthians 7, chapter 7, verse 29, I say this, brothers, the time is limited, or the time is short. So from now on, those who have wives should be as those who have none. So he's telling us, hey, ditch your wives, ignore them. No. He's just reminding them, marriage, contrary to groups such as Mormonism, marriage is only for this life in this world. And so therefore, husbands, as well as wives, this go both ways, but he's saying, husbands, just remember, marriage is not the be-all, end-all. You ought to love, you're told, Paul elsewhere tells us to love our wives, to lay our lives down for our wives. Does that sound like kicking them to the curb? No. He's just saying, always remember, it is something for this life. It is not for all eternity. In eternity, we won't be married. So there's a balance in there. A balance. And those who weep as though they did not weep. Elsewhere, Paul tells us to weep at those who weep. What am I supposed to? Well, here he's talking about the fact, and I would say, there is weeping that goes on in the world, but if you remember that the things that are the cause of weeping are short term and they're for this life, it puts it in perspective so that you are not all consumed by weeping. I've known people for who long durations just cannot, they're in such a state of grief they can't control themselves and they can't hardly function anymore because of this. And if they would remember that's only for this life, it would ease that. Yes, there's going to be weeping and grief, but it doesn't have to be the thing that becomes all-consuming. I think by a balance on that, those who rejoice, as though they did not rejoice. Obviously, in the context, this must be rejoicing with regard to the world. Are there things that we get excited about? I've got a newer used car sitting in my driveway. Every time I get in that turn and ride it, it's so comfortable for me, and I'm like, oh, I'm thankful for this. But you know what I realize? It's something for this life. And my life is not complete because of that. My life isn't particularly better because of that. But it's something God's allowed me to have, and I keep it in check. But there are people that are defined by their vehicle, defined by their house, defined by their, again, fill in the blank. Tempers your rejoicing. Go ahead and rejoice. But just always keep it in perspective. And he says, and those who buy as though they did not possess. So, when you, pass the cash or swipe the credit card, whatever you do at the store, make sure you leave the merchandise there at the counter and just go to your car. No, he's just saying, and think about that. I've got books in here. I'm surrounded by these books, and there's been times that, you get a new book and it's a book that you've wanted for a long time. I'm sure this. I bought, and I've got both of these here. I have one that I bought in 1983 when I took my first Greek class. And it's a New Testament Greek English interlinear translated by Alfred Marshall. But it had a King James in the margin. When I went to seminary, there was this one that had the New American Standard in the margin. And I really wanted that. But I was a poor seminary student, poor as church mice, and I didn't have $19 to spend on this at the time, which I always laugh now. What, $19? I didn't have $19 to spend on that. But I remember the day I found this copy out in Grand Rapids, Michigan, traveling with my brother-in-law and a friend. And we stopped in a bookstore and I found this. And I'm telling you, you would have thought I was a kid that was just granted entrance into the greatest theme park ever. I just about couldn't hardly contain myself. But even though this is a Bible, I still remind myself, I've got other Bibles in here. And we can sometimes buy something and we feel that possession, this completes me now. Now I'm complete. If only I can get that thing. What I have is good, but that would be better. And we're about stuff. Think about how much stuff we buy trying to, in some way, make ourselves feel better. In other words, you're saying, it's okay to own stuff, okay to acquire things, but don't make it the be-all, end-all. Life is not made up of the things that we buy, that we own. And then verse 31, and those who make use of the world. You see this? And those who make use of the world. He says, cut it out. No, he doesn't. He says, and those who use or make use of the world as though they did not make full use of it. It's this word, but simply with the preposition on the beginning of it that says to really use it up, or technically use it down in the Greek, but you understand. In other words, when you make use of the world, it does not become the be-all, end-all. You don't then say, well, hey, the world helped me accomplish this. I'm going to see if I can go fix that system and make that system in the world even better. That's not what you're called to do. We have to make use of the world. I have friends on the other side of the world, and you know what they have to do? They have to go through a process with governments in the world and applying for visas and getting their passports and all that stuff and making use of shipping systems to get the items, their possessions to the other side of the world to carry on the work God's given them. And we do that all of the time here. We make use of the world system. I bet most of you listening to this, you probably have in your pocket or in your purse a credit card. You use that atom of the world system to do what? Maybe to buy groceries, maybe to pay for gas. You use it to accomplish things, but you don't go, oh, this is the be all end all, this is the greatest thing in the world. No, you don't use it up because you realize my life does not consist of the things that I can accomplish through the world system. So it tempers that. And then he makes this statement that is very much like John makes in 1 John 2. For the world in its current form, the word schema, it's the idea in the current scenery. Have you ever been to a play and you watch the scenery change up there before you? The curtain goes up, the curtain comes down, or maybe they just kind of dim the lights and you watch some of the scenery move off and you have a different scene and you're like, wow, but it's scenery. And it's just scenery. It's temporary. There's nothing substantial to it. And in that scenery, he says, it is passing away. There's a scenery in the world. And I think when we're talking about love and loving other believers, one of the things that helps us to focus on loving other believers is to remind ourselves when we're baited and drawn in by the world with all of these different things, whatever it might be, that we remember that it's just scenery. It's temporary and it's passing away. And why would I want to invest so much of my life in the temporal when I could invest in the eternal, which is my brothers and sisters in Christ, and loving them? So much better than any kind of experience or payback that you will ever get with the world system. Thank you for joining me today, and have a good day in the Lord.